Hi, welcome to Yes Also. I'm Susie Barrett. My guest today is Oscar Montoya. What a sweetheart. Oscar is the host of the Eurovangelists podcast, and he plays Richie on the TV show Minx. In the improv world, he trained at the Magnet Theater in New York and at the People's Improv Theater, also known as the Pit. At the Pit, he was on a house team called Local 154, and at the Magnet, he was on Aquarius. And at UCB LA, he was on the Herald teams Nomi Malone and Pony. Oscar is a delight of a human being, and if you've seen him play, you know what an absolutely fearless and infectiously joyous performer he is. So imagine how shocked I was to learn during this conversation, and you will hear it, that he walked out of the very first improv class he took because he was too intimidated. I'm glad he didn't stay away forever. I'm glad it turned out okay. But wow, what a story. Let's get to it. Hi, Oscar.
Hi, Susie.
Welcome to Ryan's living room.
It's a nice place. I was saying off the pod that it just feels like a home. Well, Ryan's made this a home.
And it is, and you live here now.
Thank you.
Welcome.
You hear that, Ryan? I live here now.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Oscar, talk to me about so we're friends and fellow improvisers, but I only know the broad strokes of your improv journey. I know that you moved to LA from New York.
Yes.
I don't know anything about your early improv life or training. Can you run me through that and then
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I started improv. I did improv in 2010 is when I started. And I started at UCB, and then I left UCB.
In a huff?
I left, actually, in my 101, during the first class. I left halfway through during the break, and I never came back. I mean, I came back 2 years later.
Whoa.
Because it just was so terrifying to me. And I was lied to by my friend who recommended improv class.
Well,
I was very nervous because I never did comedy before. I didn't do comedy. I took improv classes to get over stage fright I had as a dancer, and my friend Chopper was like, "Oh, you should take improv classes," and I was like, "I don't know comedy people. Like, I don't."
Your name is Chopper.
Your
I don't know whether
Chopper,
to trust
yeah,
you.
Like, I don't know if I can trust you. And he was taking classes at the time. He was like, "Don't worry. Like, you take this beginner's class, and there's tons of people that aren't comedians that take that class." And I was like, okay, cool, awesome. I signed up for it. And on the first day, you go around and you say like who you are and like whatever. And everybody was going and like very, theater kid energy, very like boisterous, loud, like I need to be on SNL. And I was just like, this is too much, too aggressive, like too difficult for me. And then during the break I left and fully was just like, I cannot do this. But I became obsessed with improv. This idea of like making stuff up, not having, because I've never seen improv before. I didn't do it in school or anything like that. So like I just didn't know how people did that. It just felt like magic to me.
So did you see your first improv show after this
Yes.
101?
Yes.
Gotcha. So you were like, but I'll go watch it and see what people are up to.
Yep. And became obsessed. And in this way of like trying to crack the code of like, oh, what made that person say this word instead of this? And like, they chose to do, this is where the comedy. So like I looked at it sort of like very clinically, and then after 2 years and going to see like every show at UCB and other theaters in New York, I was like, I should go back. And then I did it at another theater called the People's Improv Theater, and that's where it stuck. And I've been doing it ever since. I was on a house team at the People's Improv Theater called Local 154. That was like my first official house team. And then I was on a musical improv house team at the Magnet Theater called Aquarius, one of my favorite teams ever. And then in 2015, I moved here, sort of like getting the scope of the improv scene in LA. And started doing boot camp. That was like my first foray into the improv scene in LA. I just fell in love with it. And like, Susie, you're like a big part of my love of the improv scene in LA.
Really?
Like you, yes. And Joel Spence and Drew DeFonso Marks, like all of you were so integral in me staying doing improv. Because when I moved to LA, I've been doing improv for a minute and was just sort of like disillusioned by it, and going to it because I was a pit person coming to LA. There's no pit in LA, so I was just like, I think I can close that chapter of my book. I'm here to move on and do something else.
Brief tangent. You were moving to LA to pursue dancing? Or?
No. I stopped dancing. I tore my ACL, so I couldn't do it professionally in like 2013. So I stopped doing it and then just got into improv like hard, And then I moved to LA for a TV show job, and was like, oh, that's just going to be my thing now.
Yeah. What was the show?
It's called Kevin from Work, but I got fired from that show.
No.
2 weeks into moving to LA, got fired from that show.
No.
And was just like, what am I going to do now? Like, I was completely lost.
Did they give you a reason, or was it just one of those like, we're going in a different direction?
Yeah. I have a feeling, because this was at a time where people were fully very open about being a diversity hire, and during the course of like before shooting the pilot, people were getting uncast and cast again, and they were like, oh, he's not the diversity on the show anymore, because they hired someone who was of color, and they were like, oh, we wanted to hire somebody who wasn't of color for this role. And so that's what happened.
And we can only have one person of color.
Exactly.
And if that person can be straight, then that's preferable.
Yes, exactly. So you get it.
Yes. As someone who has spent many years as the one woman on male improv teams, I've had a fraction of that, but a similar vibe where it's like, well, you are replacing the woman, and then when you get taken off the team, the woman replaces you.
Which is, that was the thing.
Yeah.
When I was starting, it was
For
very
a
much
while.
like there was only having two women on a team was like revolutionary.
Yes.
And of course, one POC.
Right.
And it was like, usually the women were the voice of reasons. You know what I mean? Like, you couldn't be, if you were a silly woman, it was like, whoa.
Slow down, Carol Burnett. Take that curtain rod out of your shoulders.
Exactly.
And often just trounced in group games. Like the entire group game or group scene you spend going like, I would, well, that, could I?
Yeah.
And then that's
no. Women
sweep at
provide
it.
the button of the scene.
Right.
That's it. They can't play along with the boys.
Right.
That's crazy.
Okay, so you moved here for Kevin from Work, and then it's dropped your life in New York completely.
Absolutely.
You were like, I'm going to LA, suitcases, trunk, got fired, and now you're in LA and you don't have a job.
I don't have a job. I don't really know anybody. All the people that I knew from New York that like moved to LA were like older, had children, had a family, not doing comedy anymore, like very much like also up to full capacity with their friend circle, which I totally understand. It's a thing that,
Capacity.
they're just like, we love you, but like,
There's a bouncer at their house. Like, until someone leaves, you can't come in.
they only have 5 friends. You are the 6th,
Yeah.
and you cannot come here, So,
Oscar, this is terrifying.
Yeah.
Just this, it's like what you see in movies. Like, this is straight up Midnight Cowboy. It's like you come to the city with a dream, and then it's like, mwah, mwah, mwah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So I became a gigolo, and no, I'm kidding.
It's okay if you did.
Yeah, truly. No, I wasn't that smart or resourceful. No. So yeah, I was just like in this new city, figuring it out. And I was just like, well, what are some things that brought me joy? I'll go see an improv show at UCB. And I did with a friend of mine, Desiree Nash, who did stuff at the Magnet, but didn't do stuff in LA, any comedy stuff in LA. And I got to meet some people. And I don't know through this, I was hanging out at Birds, and someone was talking about boot camp. And to me, it felt like, oh, because I don't have a job anymore. I have a lot of free time. What a great way to spend my free time here. And so I started going, and that's where I met all of my friends.
Amazing.
That's literally where where the catalyst of my improv journey in LA started.
Wow. Yeah. For those at home, boot camp was a practice group basically that Jim Woods and I co-founded in 2010, I think,
Wow.
2009, where it was basically the idea was like it's sort of like an improv gym. You would pay a monthly fee and you would be a member for that month. We would cap it at 16 people. You don't have to come every day. It was like Monday through Friday, 12 to 2, and you could come as much or as little as you want. But for that month, it's that permutation of people.
Where did that stem from?
You know, I had a student in a practice group, Liz Wilson, who interviewed me for a class at UCLA, and one of the questions was, what made you, what leveled up your improv, or what was the difference for you in being like floundering versus becoming good? And I said my time at Boom Chicago, and part of it was just doing it every single day.
Yep.
And she went, man, I wish there was a way to do it every day here, but there's just not. And like a light bulb went off. And at the time, I was cobbling together rent with teaching practice groups, and so was Jim, who was my roommate. And we both had like 13 practice groups a week coming in and out of our living room, just like, you know, several a day. We were like, why don't we take our favorite people from these practice groups and ask if they want to meet just every day at this other location? We'll just rent a space.
Yeah.
And we tried it for the first month as an experiment. Ryan Rosenberg was in that first month. And people loved it, and we loved it. And we would do also shows at the end of each week, so it was a way also to get on your feet.
Gotcha.
After a while, we realized, people, it's hard to get people to come to these shows because there's shows at theaters, and it's like, how many times can you tap your friends to come see your practice group show? But, okay, so someone was talking about boot camp. You entered boot camp.
Yeah.
You made it's a great way to make friends because you're seeing people every day.
It was great. You got your reps in, and you started forming a community of those 16 people that were there, you know? And that was like, and then at boot camp, I met someone named Ruha Teslimi, and they were such an integral part of me not just ditching improv completely, because they were fully immersed in the scene. And
yeah, they were someone who was coming to like every single show, doing every practice group, knew everybody. It was just like the mayor of the indie improv scene in LA at the time. And we took a liking to each other right away. We vibed really well, and Ruha was very much like, come with me, I'll show you around, I'll show you the ropes. Here's your pink ladies jacket.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're one of us now.
Yeah.
Which was great, because I feel like if it wasn't for boot camp, I don't know if I would be still in the improv scene at all. And just like meeting those people, and these are people that go to boot camp are people who take improv very seriously, you know, and want to be not necessarily like house team members, but like do shows that have an impact in the LA improv community.
Right.
You know, these aren't people that are just like, I'm just taking this class to be on a team eventually. Like, these people get reps and take it very seriously.
Yeah, they're perfecting their craft.
Exactly.
And they care about the community, and they want to make friends. And
Right. Which I needed.
Yeah.
Because it was a great balance of fun community building and also really sort of sharpening your specific improv talent that you had. And for me, and also like, I do remember going and doing improv in LA and like having people react in a way that I was not used to. That was very different to the way that I was like perceived in New York when I was doing improv.
Talk to me about this.
So in New York, I was very active in the improv scene in New York. I was doing a lot of stuff there. I was doing a bunch of shows at most of the theaters in New York, but I was always felt like, and I was like, you know, it wasn't that I was hated or anything, but the feeling felt very dismissive over my sort of play, which felt very like silly, very physical, because like my background in dance, and immediately it wasn't okay. I'll tell you something. So I used to be a nanny for 7 years, and it's what I did while I was doing improv. And the kid's father is an actor, and went to an audition for something, and there was this other improviser there that was like they were going for the same role, and he was this very revered improviser who's from Chicago, moved to New York, and sort of took over and was just like, that I am what improv is in New York. And they started talking, and Rob, my boss, was like, oh, Oscar, my kid's nanny does improv at the place that you do improv. And he was like, oh, Oscar. And he was like, oh, yeah, Oscar. Yeah, Oscar's kind of goofy, huh? And he was like, whoa, what? He's like, yeah, I don't know. He's just sort of like goofy and kind of like, I don't know. He plays like a child. Oof. Is what he told my boss. So my boss told me, and it like crushed me because it was like, this is how I'm perceived.
Also, why would your boss tell you that?
I don't know. I don't know, but I appreciate him telling me because,
well, now it can fuel your fire as you show them.
Exactly. Yeah. But I never did in New York. I was always just sort of seen as like, there's someone who like, I think New York improv is just very like verbal, very verbose.
Very writerly.
Very writery, very sort of like detached emotionally, but very quick, very witty, very fast comedy. Yes. And it feels like a battle of wit between the improvisers. And I was not like that at all. I'm not very smart. I don't like talking a lot in scenes. I'm very physically active, and people were just sort of like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, but that's your superpower. I love the way you play. Like I think about every 2 weeks or so, I'll remember this moment in a show, and it still makes me laugh out loud. We were doing a PDQ show, and you entered a scene by like, you entered and then they didn't need you. It was like two people stepped in to be the dad that was called or something.
Yes.
And you deferred and let the other person play the dad. But then instead of just exiting, you opened a window, climbed out the window like a cat burglar, and then launched a contraption that's like Inspector Gadget's helicopter backpack with the handlebars and flew away.
I remember that.
God. Damn it, that was so funny.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's I'm just like, I don't know. That's like, that brings me joy. That's like fun for me, right?
Also, it's so funny, sidebar, for someone to scrunch their nose up and like snottily say that, or snootily, that he plays playfully. Like he plays like a child. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Was I playing too much like a child during this art form where we make shit up that doesn't exist and run around playing fake people?
Right. But that was inherently like the issue there, or like the big thing in New York, where it was just like maybe so close to Broadway or something, or like theater is a big deal over there or something. But like a lot of very revered improvisers took it so seriously in a way that like, this is not. The fun that I get from improvising comes from a very serious place. I need to be the smartest person. I need to know every single reference. Like, it just became very competitive in terms of like, the leader of this group is a person who is the smartest, right? And it just didn't gel with the kind of play that I played. So I was very much like deemed as a very wacky, weird, goofy, silly player, which, yes, but for me, like I play because of joy. Like I come from a place of like, this is fun for me, so I'm going to do what is fun for me. Yeah. And then when I moved to LA, I remember I did a scene where I did something physical and I didn't talk in the scene. And I remember the response was so like, people were like, I did it at a clubhouse show and people were like, can you do that? Like, oh, wow, like, that was so cool. And I was like, cool? Oh, in New York, that would have been seen as, like, goofy or stupid. But here it was, like, cool. Huh, okay. Very strange, very weird. And then I realized very quickly that LA improvisers play from a place of joy. That's where... I mean, I'm generalizing, obviously. A lot of improvisers take it way too seriously. But like, I don't know. I think like they're very interested in like, oh, how could I do something different or something that's very unique to me as a player instead of like what I think the audience needs or like this weird persona of like who I am. So
yeah, versus like trying to do it correctly or trying to show something off or trying to like, match wits with the fellow scene partner. Yeah.
And you know what it was? It ultimately, and I think you have this, so you're like the pro at this. Every place comes from a place of honesty, which you've taught me a lot at boot camp. Like you strengthen that place of like, oh, it's not like just silly. Like you can play from joy, you can play from anything that you want. It just has to come across as honest, you know, and committed, you know, and there has to be a level of groundedness to it. You did an exercise in boot camp that I'll never forget, which is where like we did a scene and then you sort of asked us questions as our characters.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to acting school, so like I've never had that sort of exercise, and it blew. Like I was just like, oh, wait, oh, these are people. Okay, great. Oh, and it like really changed the way that I played into a more honest form and a more grounded way of playing. And like teachers like you really shaped my sense of voice of reason work in a way that I never cared to like grow or learn because it wasn't necessarily fun for me.
Yeah. Did you see it as the boring job or like the logic and not the right brain fun?
It felt like an equation that had to be there in order to make the math work, which I was like, I didn't do this for the math of it. But what you did is you opened this weird door where I was like, you can find the fun in this math.
Yeah.
The voice of reason isn't like someone who's like detached from this world of comedy. Like you can add comedy in that voice of reason work through perspective and relationship.
Yeah.
Which I never thought of.
Something you do really well that I love, that tickles me, is like when you're playing a voice of reason character, you allow your character to laugh and find things funny. Like when you get exasperated, you'll be like, wait, what? I'm sorry, you thought it was okay to bring a tarantula to your desk at work? What? Like, and I think that's such a nuanced, sort of advanced way of playing that a lot of younger improvisers feel like they can't do. They're like saying lines or they have to be serious as that character. But yeah, it's like, yeah, if you would be exasperated, if you would laugh, if you would find something funny, absolutely your character can.
Why not?
Yeah,
why not? And it breaks away from this weird relationship that a lot of improvisers have with voice of reason, which is like voice of reason is the work, but it's like no, you can plug fun into voice of reason,
right?
You know, and that to me is really fun. Also, the thing that I noticed too about LA improvisers is that they improvise way slower than New York improvisers. I've done shows with a lot of New York improvisers that moved to LA, and now really cutting my teeth through the LA scene and like really falling in sync with the LA improvisers, I can see the change. And New York improvisers are aggressive. They're just like very forceful energy, like big moves. They swing big and they commit hard. And a lot of LA improvisers are slower paced. And there's, I don't want to say LA improvisers are more polite, but they sort of give space to other people to be like, do you have an idea?
Or maybe we're just dumber and we don't know what to say. And it comes off as patience. Like, do you know what to say?
I do remember doing improv at boot camp and doing shows at the clubhouse and like getting a little impatient of like, oh, why are people like not initiating right away? Like, what's going on? This is eating away at like showtime, you know? But that's just the vibe of LA people just take their time.
That's so interesting. Do you think so when you say and again, sweeping generalization,
Yes.
when you say that New York improvisers play faster, do you mean their scenes heighten more quickly? Do you mean they are aggressive with tags, and so like we just get a few lines out and then they're tagging in to go somewhere else? Or
I feel like they initiate at a 10. Like I think LA improv like builds to a place, builds to game or eases into game, or or the or whatever, the fun stuff. New York improvisers start at the apex of the scene and then sort of plateau there, or even go higher, where you don't have that chance to like sort of breathe in the scene a little bit. But I think it's the immediacy of like, this is my idea and here it is, right? Whereas like LA improvisers take their time. They do a little like, oh hi, blah blah blah, how was your day? Oh, object work a little. Here's the premise.
Set the world first,
Exactly.
then drop the needle on the game.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're talking about your perception of New Yorkers or that style being more cerebral, more writerly. So it would make sense. It's like they want to deliver what they think is the funniest, and then the next person is like, well, and here's how I'll heighten it.
Absolutely.
And then here's where we can tag it. It's just like a writer's room of joke pitches.
Exactly.
Which can be very funny to watch.
Absolutely.
I love watching people who are able to just spin a show that
and maintain
quickly.
that energy the entire time. Like,
Right.
wow. Also, like, I think keeping that in mind, it's like they're like, we don't have time to. Why waste time easing into the world?
Mm-hmm.
As a writer, I know what my jokes are. I know what the premise is. Here it is. I don't need to I don't have time to sort of like make this a believable scene right now. Like, that's not funny to me. Yeah.
And there is an argument that, the slower style you're talking about, the shadow side of that is it can lean too indulgent. Or it can feel like, oh, these two people don't have
Absolutely.
anything. They're just
Yes.
washing dishes next to each other,
Right.
and
Like
once
a
in a while
meandery
looking
sort of
over.
scene.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that can be agonizing to watch,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you don't know if they have something, or you,
Right.
you detect, audiences can sniff fear in the air.
Yep.
And if you detect questioning fear out of your performers, and
Exactly. Or if you have a premise in the back line and you initiate to sort of ease into it, something happens that sort of moves your premise sort of askew a little, and then you're sort of thinking like, okay, how do I replug this into? So there's a lot of thinking happening that could be sacrificed when you ease into it versus initiating right away. Here's my premise. It's not going to be distracted by anything else. This is my idea. Can we play this? And your scene partner is like, I rise to the challenge, or take it away. You lead the scene. You tell us where we go.
Right.
know?
Yeah. What are your what shows are you doing now? What are your favorite types of shows to do, and what is your vision for future shows? Do you have anything that you've wanted to do that you haven't put on stage yet?
Yeah. Well, I do PDQ with you. I have Benetton. I have Pony, and I have Rita Repulsa. So,
Are all of these like premise-based shows where you're based on an interview or
Yes,
something, or
exactly.
a monologue, and then you're pulling premises?
Right, exactly.
Do you do anything organic? Do you like organic?
I don't, and I do love organic. I love, I back into the physicality of stuff. I do love this idea of incorporating physicality into scene work more, especially when stuff is derived from a monologue. It is very premise heavy, and we have all the premises from something that inspires us. Whereas, like, to me, I like sort of the looseness of what improv can be. I taught a class at UCB a couple of months ago, which was like the soundtrack Herald, which I really loved because, it's a soundtrack form, but I don't do talking in the opening at all. So the premises that we're pulling is from repeated physical patterns that the music inspires.
So talk
the
me
class.
through this. So I know soundtrack, which for the listeners, it's you play a bit of a song. The DJ selects a song or the audience pitches a song. You hear maybe 20 seconds of that. That fades out or stays up, and we do a silent scene. But then after the song is gone, the performers, inspired by that, do a scene. In Soundtrack Herald, what
Yes.
are you doing?
So we will play a playlist curated by the students, and we put it on shuffle, and we ask an audience member to pick one song that strikes them. And, we play like maybe 3 seconds of a song, and they'll say stop at a song, and that's the song that we'll hear. We hear one song.
In its entirety.
It's in its entirety, or until someone edits the scene or starts talking. That's when the music goes down. And so what happens, it's sort of an organic sound and movement opening, which is like, looking at the class and looking at your team and sort of adapting movement that the song, like if it's a loud, aggressive song, then you move aggressively and then you follow that. And if that reminds you of something like, oh, I'm flailing my arms around, it reminds me of being on a roller coaster, then like we start seeing the scene be on a roller coaster and we see patterns that happens there that we then will use like, oh, is there a premise here? Or is there a pattern that we're like, maybe someone at a roller coaster is like bird watching, like physically looking at binoculars, and oh, that's something very funny that is taken physically, so not verbally. And then we move organically from one scene to the other. So we figure out another set of choreography that someone will sort of swarm the scene and turn it into something else. So we see 3 to 5 scenes, then someone edits by revisiting that first one, roller coaster. And then we know like, oh, this is the Herald has started, right? So then they'll start talking, being like, oh, it looks like you're obsessed with bird watching while we're on a roller
Got it.
coaster.
So that whole first sequence of movement bubbles is all the opening.
Yes,
And that's
exactly.
all while the song is playing.
Yes, exactly.
And then once dialogue starts, now we are in traditional scenes, but we're pulling them from that sort of sound opening. Yeah,
yes,
cool.
Yes. Yeah. And then for the group games, those are all entirely organic, silent group games.
Cool.
But yeah, other than that, it's just a Herald. You know what I mean? We just take, instead of like, like a pattern game where it's just like, pitching like you would in a writer's room, we're doing much more physical, organic movement, And I really love having improvisers sort of like start looking at physicality as a clue to premise, instead of just being like, oh, a premise is this verbal idea that I have, and being like, oh, the way that they moved in this unusually moved in this situation, in this location that we've set up, that's the premise,
What I love about that is that's such a good example of you were talking earlier about like what is someone's comedic voice or what is their identity as a performer. That's such a personalized
Yes.
version of like what a teacher or a director can bring based on your passion for dance, on your vocabulary from your past of movement. You can now connect the dots for performers
Absolutely.
and say like, well, you're teaching that, you're bringing that from,
But it all matters, right?
Of
It's like,
course.
with improv especially, it's like you bring you to the table. What is it that you can give us? I mean, that's what comedy is. It's just like,
Of
what is your
course.
perspective? Talk, let's hear it. Like share where you come from. Like what do you bring to the table? And I think instead of looking at comedians or improvisers as blank canvases walking into a scene, I'm more interested in, okay, what does Susie bring to scenes that is so Susie? What does Ryan bring to the table that is so Ryan? Like, I love that.
Yeah, and it's so fun to live in a community of improvisers, especially with a thriving indie scene, where you can put together a combo of different people, and every combo you play with is totally different. And each scene you do produces different chemical reactions between those
Absolutely.
performers. Yeah, like I want more people to be inspired to teach and direct the way you are, which is like using something that is so central to the way you see the world or to what your talents are attuned to, and putting improv through that lens, or threading the needle with that specific
Yes.
point of view.
Yes.
That's great. And I think there's so much room, at least in LA, but probably everywhere, to produce more creative shows that are done that way. Or this form is young and it's also infinite. We can be
absolutely.
creative with how we push it, right?
I mean, it's just the magic of improv to me is like you can do anything. There are no rules. You can do whatever you want. It's not defined. It's not confined in any way. And it's just like, how do we make this art form work for us? What are we trying to say? What are we trying to do? And for me, I'm always looking at, as an audience member, because, we've done improv for so long. We've seen the same kind of shows. To me, I'm just like, I want to see a show that is different. And I want to see what students, this new generation of improvisers, bring to the table in terms of like themselves. Like, what does improv, like what does it expose about you as a person? That's exciting to me.
Yeah. Is there a dance herald in your future, or something that you could do with that?
I've like talked about this ad nauseum about like, how do I incorporate dance and improv? And I've done shows with Ruha and Amy Hessler, who I knew Amy years and years and years ago
In New York? Oh, wow.
But as dancers, like we were auditioning for similar stuff. Like I knew her in the dancing world. So then when I moved, and I haven't spoken to her in forever because I stopped doing dance, and when I moved to LA, I saw her at a Clubhouse show, and I haven't seen her in like 5 years. And I was like, Amy? And she was like, Oscar? And we both said to each other, we're like, you're doing comedy now? Like, it's so crazy that. And then Amy and I were on our very first Herald team together, Nomi Malone. And it was so wild. I was like, life is crazy that way. Like, we were in a totally different world, and we found ourselves in a different city doing the exact same thing. It's crazy.
Life is a herald, Oscar.
Life is absolutely. And that was the second beat, But we did a show called The Score, which was like incorporating dance and music into our improv. But I feel like there is a dance herald there. I haven't cracked it to a place where I feel really good about it. But I would like to explore dance. And I think maybe the soundtrack herald is like the intro to that, but I want to develop it further. I want to work on this idea of choreography, into improvised choreography in a herald.
I almost see room for like having like a little company of 3 or 4 super trained dancers who maybe aren't comedians, but they provide the interstitial, like they are taking themes from the herald and doing amazing little interstitial 20-second pieces.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking of like doing something about including choreography as edits.
Yes.
Taking us from one scene to the next.
Yes.
It's just.
That would be mind-blowing. That would be so cool. Yeah, especially in the right space where you could have real lighting transitions.
Oh, my gosh. And I come from the contemporary dance world. I never did ballet. I never did, I was not like a rigid dancer. Like ballet is all technique and rigidity, right? Contemporary is more free-flowing and really is like what shapes our bodies can create. So it does lend there's a lot of correlation between contemporary dance and improvised theater.
Right.
That I'm
where
like,
it is like anything is possible.
Absolutely.
You don't have to do first position, second position.
Exactly. Yeah. It is like, what is with a lot of when I choreographed contemporary movement, the way that I would choreograph is like, I would listen to music or not even, and I would be like, hey, Susie, can you give me like a 16 count of despair, right? Like we would look at emotions, and then you would just free flow, like improvise 16 counts that your emotion is guiding you through,
That sounds like a parody.
It sounds like a parody. Yes,
Give me
absolutely.
16 bars of despair.
Great. So we'll incorporate that. Maybe we'll loosen the 4 to 6 count on that.
A little less ankle.
Yeah. You kid, but that was the way that we choreographed stuff.
Wild. I'm mesmerized by that.
Yeah.
It's so like far outside of my purview. Did you ever audition for So You Think You Can Dance?
No. Oh my gosh. I have a bit of a bone to pick with that show.
Pick it.
Well, because it's less about dance. I mean, dance nowadays, I feel like it's swinging back to the way that it used to be. But back when So You Think You Could Dance, it caused an epidemic in the dance world where dancing became more of gymnastics than it did choreographed movement. And like I wasn't doing flips or tricks at all. But it became this thing where it's like, oh, dancing became very performance heavy, where it was like you gotta do something that is like a trick.
Yeah, you gotta be a showstopper.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. It's like season 1, very dancey. Then season 2 has to outdo it. So very quickly we're in third beats.
Yes,
and then we find
absolutely.
ourselves in 8th beats.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh dear.
And that is the norm. And then that became our grounded based reality, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, can you do this insane gymnastics? And a lot of gymnasts then sort of I was going to say infiltrate, and that sounds incredibly harsh. We love gymnasts in the dance world. They sort of came to the dance world and sort of like that was the norm.
Right.
It was like, oh, you had to be a gymnast in order to dance. Where it's like, for me and choreography, it's like, whatever body you're in, that's what you bring to the table. It's about movement and it's about emotion reacting to movement. You know?
Yeah.
So for me, it was just very much like, okay, this show.
As we were talking about this, I found myself going, is improv in danger of that? Because all sports move in that direction.
Yes.
Snowboarding is super dangerous now because each season has to outdo the last.
Because it's a performance, isn't it? I mean, drag is exactly the same now, where it's like you got to do a split. If you don't do a split you're not a drag queen if you're not doing a split, which is like, not everyone, that's not drag. That's not what
if
drag
your
is.
dick doesn't fall off by the end of this performance, then you're not.
If you're not going to the ER after this performance, you're not a
dead
performer.
to us.
You know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I wonder if I'm just talking and thinking out loud here, but if improv is grounded by the fact that at least the kind of improv we do, it always has to be funny.
Yes.
And you can't heighten too far. It's like we can't race past the length of the racetrack. Like it has to be grounded in something believable and real, or we won't laugh at it.
Right.
So maybe that's the grounding wire that keeps it.
But I mean,
sane. I don't know.
If you look at a herald and you think about like it's the innate form makes it like there has to be some show-stopping moment, at least in the third beats anyway. And I've seen so many. I mean, I teach now, so having students going to see shows and being like, there was one performer that climbed on top of the stage and it was like the funniest something ever. And I'm like, was it on game though? And they were like, no, they just got up there.
Right.
And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah.
You know? So there is that element of like, if you're not climbing up on top of the stage and doing a scene like from the rafters of the theater, then you're not doing, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's not a moment, you know?
I mean, I do love that people have their eyes on that. I'm a big fan of like using the space in creative ways, but yeah, serve the game first. Like have it connect to the show or what you're actually heightening.
Yeah.
Can't do it for the sake of,
Then it feels like a stunt, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you're just like, well, it's cool that you can do that.
Yeah.
And very funny if it fits. But if it's just a stunt to be like, how can I make this show memorable?
Right.
It's like, well, rely on your comedic voice, you know?
Right. But yeah, there is room, I think, in heralds. People see heralds as so restrictive. I think the restriction is the gift that makes them creative.
Absolutely.
Like how do you, within this constraint, how can you blow this out and show us something we haven't seen?
Oh my gosh.
And my personal philosophy is like the best time to do that is in group games because they can be a totally absurd, detached departure from grounded scenic reality.
Absolutely.
And my favorite group game, or one of, but I think it's my favorite. In class one day, Dave Tooney was in boot camp this part, and I was like, do a group game that I've never seen before. Show me something I haven't seen. And I don't remember what the suggestion was, but it was something like competition or something. And Tooney ran back to the back of the theater and turned all the lights off and then started being a basketball announcer. We've got a real barn burner today at the NCAA finals. And everyone on stage immediately started squeaking their shoes on the stage. So it just became a radio play.
Brilliant.
So simple. And like we've all seen and done The Bat. We've done Heralds in the Dark. But for this to be just one in the dark moment in the middle of scenes was wonderful.
That's memorable.
Right.
And people don't realize that with group games you're not confined to justifying or doing any of the work that you need to do in your beats, like release us from all of that work that we saw in your first beats,
right,
and in your second beats. That's what I always say. It's like, this is the time to turn off your brain and just like play with each other, right? To me, like the best Herald teams I've seen are the ones that really get group games because it shows full support, non-judgmental moves from the ensemble, and it shows the imagination, group imagination. I love watching group games. Anyone can do game. I think anybody is capable of playing really sound, really solid games in a Herald. But I don't think everyone can play memorable group games.
When you say everyone is capable of game, you mean like game of the scene?
Game of the scene,
right.
Yeah. Like in first beats, if you like do the math and like do the work, like Heralds are great because it, like even not funny people can be very successful at game. There is like a formula to it.
With enough practice, yeah.
Of course, yeah,
right.
with enough practice. But like, I don't know if that will reflect in your group games because it is about the letting go of it all.
But then I would argue also the inverse, like depending on your brain type.
Yes.
That you can, it's easy to be good at group games if you can just let go and just follow what's happening, because you do not have to do any math. You don't have to think, like you can,
Yep.
Now we do want to heighten one singular thing. So there's a little bit of like, I guess, math in that, but it's not as rigid, I guess, as like, you were the nosy doctor. You have to play that the whole scene.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. God, if I had the funding to do a neurological study of improvisers and what they are good at.
Do you enjoy the Heralds?
I do.
Do you miss doing it?
I do.
But what about the Herald do you miss doing?
I think it's fun to see how different each week is, despite always doing the same form. And my Herald team here, I was blessed to be on a team of like very brilliant creative people. So it felt like our success rate was high because we have these like anchors like Alex Fernie and Alex Burke who are always going to have a premise idea right out of the opening. Right. They're always going to be on game. So there was a bit of a safety net. If I was feeling tired or having an off night, I knew I would be caught by those brains.
Yes.
And then our group games, we really, as a team, decided like we don't want to do scenic group games. We want to do creative things with them.
Right.
If we did find ourselves in an everybody get in here game, we would sort of popcorn that around. So if it was like, players get in here, we're getting eaten alive by the Cougars or blah, blah, blah. And then after a beat of that, it would be like, Cougar players get in here. So we'd see the other team's locker room. And then it'd be like, mascots get in here. Yeah. It's our fault,
You would break away from scenes.
Yes. Yeah. Foam finger sellers get in here. If we can just sell. So now the overarching game is everybody in the stadium blaming themselves for the loss. We go to the valets. We go to the gas station that filled the cars before they got to the.
Yep.
So that's what we're heightening. Yeah, it was a fun mental project that was always exciting to me. Of like, what's gonna be heightened and how are we gonna do it? You know. But we're doing the like reunion Herald show next week. So
That's so fun.
like once a year I get to do one again.
Isn't that so wild?
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't see a lot of, this is like a very new thing, but like outside of Herald Night, like, I don't know. I wish there was like another Herald Night people got to see. Cause it's like, this is what we teach at this theater.
Mm-hmm.
There should be other avenues to see this form, you know?
Or does the restriction of it make it special? It's like, this is the Herald Night. Does too much of it make it, you know?
Yeah.
Or does it like dilute it because now you're seeing it done by like students who maybe haven't perfected it yet?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I'm just, yeah.
I just love it so much.
Yeah.
I love the Herald so much.
What do you love about it?
I love the skeleton of it, the rigidity of a first beat, and then the looseness of group games to back into the rigidity of it, and that it can mean something.
Mm-hmm.
That you look at the entire show and be like, oh, that was a very blank show, you know? I love that it's sort of like our statement piece to the audience, you know, based on this one word suggestion that they give us. I loved the entirety of it.
Which is the spirit of Herald, which I think
Yes.
sometimes gets lost in the breaking it down into like, what's your first beat into your second beat and what are you pulling? But yeah, the spirit of it, you know, what was that phrase like Del Close was like, did you see Herald? Like, did Herald visit, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the theme? What are you saying? Out of this word that should mean nothing, you know,
Absolutely.
apple, what have we spun out and said about the world?
And then, like, what is the take of these 8, 7, 9 individuals coming together to create a show, a piece, you know? That's what I'm so fascinated about. That's why I loved Herald. I love Herald Night because it's a great way to look at these individual teams and be like, oh, what is your take? What do you have to say? What's your strength? How are you different from any of the other ones?
What do these 7 men and 1 woman have to say?
And maybe 1 person of color. Maybe.
But not a woman and POC
No,
at the same time.
That's too much diversity.
Too much.
Someone told me that they were giving like diversity scholarships for women a while ago. Like they were so it was diverse.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, I'll tell you what, the Nomi Malone, which is my first Herald team in LA, was the first team that I wasn't the only POC.
Amazing.
I was on a team with Kirby Hal Baptiste, and
Incredible.
we were both like, this is crazy.
God, I love Kirby.
She's
like big and famous now.
I know.
Yeah, incredible.
Deservedly so. She's
incredible.
I love her.
Talk about someone who brings acting and sincerity to their comedy scenes.
Yes.
Yeah, playing the truth.
Yes.
We have to close out. We have a few minutes left. You're a physical player. Is there a favorite type of object work that you like doing?
Ooh. Oh my gosh. You know, as you stated, to me, there's something really fun about entering a scene and exiting a scene. For me, that's like where, because it's not just a stage for me. I really look at location. Like I visualize the place, and there is something really fun about, because you know, there's a lot of people that do walk-ons that just sort of like materialize, and then when they do the walk-on move, which is great, you should do this, they just like leave the room.
Right.
But I'm like, what happens there? Like, did you walk out of the, like, you know, did you just like phase through a wall or something? Like, I'm always so curious and interested about entering and exiting the area.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Opportunities for
Oh my gosh.
Character development and comedy just in that moment. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I heard an interview with Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who did Fleabag about a year ago, and she was saying her favorite thing to write is people ordering food at a restaurant because just in the way they order or what they order, you can say so much about their character.
Yeah.
So she's like, it feels like a throwaway line, but if you go around the table, it's like you see everyone's character game. So I've tried to infuse that into improv scenes as well.
That's
It's like
amazing.
no wasted moments. Don't just order a coffee, Yeah, cool. And is there a favorite type of character you love to play?
Ooh.
Or what types?
Oh my gosh. I love like a high status. I really have fun with a high status, very wealthy character. Because I have no money and I'm not high status at all. There's something really fun about a high status, rich character that I really love playing.
I love that. And now that you've come through this journey from someone who was a dancer who wanted to get over stage fright, which is so bananas to me because you are one of the most fearless performers I've ever seen. And now
that took a lot of work, by the way. That took years and years of
years of personal work, like at home therapy, like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Like deriving where that was coming from, and then sort of like being comfortable in my skin, where I wasn't before, and also just like being comfortable as myself on stage. That was like the biggest hurdle I had to overcome, because like I was very comfortable being wacky and stuff, but like as soon as it was some sort of groundedness, I like panicked. And it was like, because I am not comfortable with myself or showing that vulnerability on stage, So that's why I look at people like you who use so much of you in your scenes. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to. Oh my gosh,
man, I didn't know that I did that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean.
I have no awareness of myself as a performer. So what advice would you give to someone who's in the beginning of that journey right now? What can they do, or what worked for you?
I mean, for me, it's like trusting yourself through the process and recognizing that it is a process. It doesn't change. I gave up immediately when I walked into that space full of like very aggressive energy, and I left, and I not wasted 2 years of my life not doing it, but like was scared for 2 years, and that said that like, that was it. That's the end of my process. But recognize that you are going through a process, and you have to be patient and know that growth is happening, even though you feel frustrated that you're not fully there yet, but that growth is happening if you commit to the growth. So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
That changed my entire life. So
allowing it to be a process.
Exactly.
It's not perfect. It might feel awkward. It might be full of fear, but if you just sit with it, it will get better.
Absolutely. Or like looking at someone and being like, why am I not there yet? I've put this much amount of work into this, and I'm still not there yet. And it's recognizing that people grow at different times, and that comparing yourself to other people isn't healthy or good for you. And that the fact that you are able to look back and see the change is monumental.
Yeah, and remembering that person you're comparing yourself to had decades of being awkward themselves or learning, and you're just looking at the final product.
Right.
Yeah.
And people just assume that they've always been that way, but that's not true.
Right. And I wonder too if there was learning and growth and integration that was happening in those 2 years where you were just watching shows. I'm saying but that's in quotes. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absorbing, getting a grasp of it from the sidelines.
It was less scary for me.
Yeah.
Not being in it, but looking at it, to me, made it less scary. To me, I was able to like walk into a magician's act as a skeptic, being like, I know how this magic trick works. Okay, that it's less scary than like, whoa, what, how, huh? Like I had 2 years of that.
You wanted to see the strings,
yes.
to make it more accessible.
For me, yes.
I love that.
Yeah.
So now, do you see yourself as a comedian?
I do.
Amazing.
I do.
You should.
Yeah.
You're hilarious.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have said that like 10 years ago or even 5 years ago,
Yeah.
I've always battled with this idea of like dancer turned comedian, because there's people who've wanted to do this since they were like babies, and for me it was something that I discovered late in life. So I always felt like, should I claim this? Like is this like right for me? I feel like an imposter. But once you shake that out and you're like, well, I'm dedicating so much time into what I love doing, which is comedy. So it's like, yeah, I should this is what I do.
Yeah.
It's what I do.
Our callings can find us at different times in our lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And just because it wasn't something that you've like dreamed since you were a baby doesn't
Yeah.
mean that it's not a wish that you have right now.
And for the record, I've seen baby comedians. They're not funny.
Overrated.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Same bits, all of them. I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah. What do you mean goo goo gaga?
Come on.
Get outta
Get a
here.
new catchphrase. Oscar, we have to go for time, but this has been amazing. Is there
Susie.
anything that you want to plug?
Yeah, I mean, like, you could follow me on social media at Ozzymo, Ozzymo. And also, I have a podcast called Eurovangelists. It's a Eurovision Song Contest podcast. It's very fun. But yeah, you can download and follow it at Eurovangelists on Instagram. Yeah, that's it.
Incredible. All right. Thanks for the great conversation.
My
And
gosh.
yeah,
Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun.
it was the best. And I'll see you in probably a couple days.
Yeah.
If you have a question about improv that you would like me to ask a future guest, email it to yesalsopod@gmail.com and I will get it on the show. If you're a fan of the show, follow us on Instagram at yesalsopod. And please help us out by liking, rating, reviewing, clicking, sending, talking, and blasting us to your improv communities. That will help us out a lot. If you're a theater who would like to host us for a live recording and improv show, let us know at yesalsopod@gmail.com. A huge shout out to Ryan Rosenberg, who produced this thing with his generous help and his unlimited knowledge about all things podcast. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week. No, we won't, Susie. That's not how podcasts work. They will see. They won't even see us. They will listen to us. So it's actually the opposite of both things you said. Thanks for listening, and you will listen to us next week. Maybe. I don't know.